part, we have to set up the code and make sure this all operates correctly. So the way we do that, to get going with the action script, again, here is the code. I'm going to basically just, remember, you have the ending bracket, don't forget that. I'm going to click and drag all the way up till the beginning of the stop and select all the code first. I'm going to go Control C or right click and go copy in the Word document. And back in Flash, all I got to do is start it at scene 1 where everything begins. So I'm going to actually select the very first keyframe on the intro page. Let's unlock all my layers here just to get a good idea. Select that first keyframe and go to Window, Actions, and we're just going to click that first line. We're going to basically, in Actions, make sure the cursor is there on line 1. I can go Control V or just right click and go Paste. Paste in my code. It should look like this. Everything's in blue where it needs to be blue here. Look at my visual. And also the purple, the function run command. Go to and play at 100. Now, if you can recall, we actually did not have scene 1 start at 100. I just got it set up as that as being the default number. Now, it could be completely different for you on your end, whatever you're doing. If you want a longer length of each scene, you can change this number, but just remember you have to also change your timeline, which I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to go and paste this code in. Now, what this is also implying is the stop, okay, it's not going to do anything until that button is clicked, being that start button at frame 1. So kind of keep that in mind. Eventually, we're going to take this stop out, and then that way it'll play the next scene. I'm going to show you more in detail what I'm talking about here. But right now, we want it to stop because we want the intro page to be shown and allows the viewer to actually click the button to start the whole animated playbook. Okay, so the instance name, well, this is most important. So we're going to click and drag, and we're going to copy this instance name again. If you can recall what we learned back in the web banner animation project. So if you haven't seen that one yet, that video, you need to go back and definitely make sure you watch it. I'm going to select button 1. I'm going to right click and go copy, and then I'm going to close out my action window. Now, if you remember, the button has to have an instance name. So my start button, I'm going to select it, and under its properties, looking for an instance name, I'm going to select that area. I can right click and go paste, or I can type it in. In this case, unlike what we learned prior, it's got a capital B for the code to work. Okay, so we're going to have that instance name. Make sure you don't get that confused. It has to look exactly the way it looks with inside the action. So this one actually has a capital B to make this work, and a lot of students in the past have failed to recognize that. They used a lowercase b. It's got to look exactly how it looks for the instance name here. And then a lot of students in the past, they fail to remember that their buttons have to have an instance name. So make sure, again, if you want this to work correctly and get a good grade on the project for submission, make sure that your instance name is spelled out in the instance name box. Make sure you have it, and make sure it matches to what it looks like in the action script. Okay, so button 1 is here, and now when we click on that, it's going to allow us to play the scene. Now, if you can remember, let's say let's go back into action. I'm going to select my first keyframe here and go back to Window Actions. Now it's starting at frame 100, and that's actually not correct as it applies to what I'm building here. Let's look at our timeline. We're actually starting the animation at 101. I just got it set up for 100. So again, wherever you're starting your animation inside your timeline, that number's got to be changed in the action. Otherwise, if it starts at 100, it's not gonna actually start at the scene that we want it to play from. So we want it to play from 101 all the way, and then eventually it's going to stop at frame 200. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you wanted to match it up by 100s, you can do this. It's very, very easy. I can just left click and select my ending keyframe from intro page, and then how we did the override, just click and drag and bring it back 1 frame. And then I can just left click and drag all the keyframes that represent where scene 1 starts, and then click and drag it back, and then I can start it at actual frame 100. So that's how you can make the corrections. Let's say if it wasn't starting 100, let's say I needed all this content to actually start like, let's say 105. I can even click and drag and select all this, select everything, release my click, then click and drag, and then I can move it all and shift it forward. Okay, I'm going to go Control Z and just back out here. Okay, in this case, we wanted to start at frame 101 and not 100 as it references what I'm doing. If you have an extra frame, I'll just select it, right click, and go remove frames. Okay. And then again, it looks like I got a blank frame here. That's wrong. Intro page, actually need it. Select that landing keyframe, then click and drag, move it to frame 100, and now everything's back. So this gives you an understanding, again, how to move things around. You can extend your animated scene. Let's say let's say you needed more frames for scene 1. I can just select the ending row of keyframes and frames, and then select them, click and drag over them to select them, release my click, and then click and drag and extend them. Okay, that's how you do that. You Control Z and go back here. All right, so actually my animation starts at frame 101. Now I did this in this video on purpose just so you can understand how the code works. So I need to actually make sure that my scene is starting at 101 and not 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go into the action script. So I'm going to go back, use my timeline scroll bar here to go back, and left click on that keyframe. If you notice, it has the little A, and that represents that keyframe has those actions applied to it. Left click it and go to Window, Actions. I'm going to change Go To and Play from 100. I'm going to actually use my keyboard here to type in Backspace and do a 101. Close it out. That's all set up. Let's go ahead, and it's wise to test your work as you're progressing here. I also make sure I'm saving. I don't even know if I've saved this yet. I haven't, so let me just go ahead and just name this. Go ahead and just name this example. Okay. And now I'm going to go to Control and Test. So you might have to save it before you do this part, but I highly recommend save your work as you progress here. So Control and Test. And let's say the button's working, and when I left click, is it going to go to frame 101? And it does. Okay? Perfect. And then it goes back to the intro page, which is what we don't want it to do. So going back to the action script here, if you look, I got running a stop command, must go on keyframe. That's the last keyframe. Probably need to fix that to last keyframe for you to understand a little bit more clear. Okay. So we're going to run the stop command. The stop command looks exactly like the stop command at the beginning of the action script that we went ahead and placed in there. So I'm going to take this stop command script. I'm going to select it, click, drag, select it all, right click, go copy, and back in Flash, the last keyframe of our scene, which was from 101. And if you remember, just in my instance, my case here, the last frame is 200. So I click on that last keyframe. Now, if you remember scene 1, if I lock all these items, and you remember, I'm going to turn all this off. Scene 1, what we did when we built the scene 1 layer is we built just basic shapes that was our background content. That's the reason why we did that, is we needed the keyframe on that layer to run the stop command. Do not run the stop command on anything that's animated, which is on the other layers that represent scene 1. Okay, so I'm going to turn all these back on. All right, and I'm going to go to that last keyframe, which contains all the background content, and that's what we're going to use to run that stop command. Go to Window, Actions. I can right click and paste it. I'm going to run that stop command, and now I'm going to File, Save, and go to Control, Test. And when I left click on the start button, rolls over and left click, it plays the animation scene 1, and notice that it does not loop back to the intro, and that's exactly what we want. Perfect. Because we want to make it where we can click on the next button and it progresses to scene 2. So close this out. Let's just say I had it at frame. Let's just say my action was set to frame 20. Close this out, and let me save it, and then go Control and test this movie. When I click the button, it's going to start at frame 20. See? And then it finally gets to scene 1. So you can see how the go to and play is working. Let's go back to action. I'll show you again. So Window, Actions. Let's say we started it not at or one of the animations started like 130. Change to 130. It's actually going to play it from this part, and we're going to miss everything up until frame 130. So File, Save. Let's test it just to show you how this script works. Left click and say we didn't even get to see all that beginning animation. So again, you got to make sure that your action script is starting the play at the right frame. So now in this case, I have everything starting at frame 100. So I'm going to select Actions, Window, Actions. I'm going to switch it to 100. And when I go File, Save, Control, Test Movie, when I click my button, it starts at 100. We see all the animation that we created, and everything looks good. Close it out. Okay? So if you have to extend your area, because if you go back to my student example I showed you, she had a lot of animation and content going on between each scene. So it wasn't just 100 frames. She had a lot of different dialogue and animations going on. This wasn't 100 frames. This could have been like 500, even maybe 1,000 frames. She had a lot of different things she wanted to incorporate within each scene. But this kind of shows you how the script works. So if you needed more time, you need a longer part of this scene to match up with your storyboard, written script, or whatever you're generating here, you understand that you can basically just extend it. So I can basically just click and drag and select all my ending part here, and then have it selected, and then I release my click and then left click and drag, and I can just drag it out and extend it to like 300. And I can get more things within this area of my timeline incorporated, and at the same time allows me to build out everything that I have in my scene, how many characters I might have, and so forth. So this is, like I said, I'm just starting my whole animation at frame 100. I could basically have this entire scene, again, let's just say, click and drag these keyframes, select them, then click and drag and move them back. Let's say I didn't want them to start at 100, I want to start at 30. So let's move all my scene to 30, and then I could left click this keyframe, select it, then click and drag it to frame 29. I get some extra frames here that I don't need, so I can left click drag them, select, right click and say remove frames, get everything back to how it was. Perfect. So let's change my action script to Window Actions 30. I will File, Save, and then Control Test. And now my animation is still there, and everything is good. Okay, and if you're noticing things are animating slower than what we originally had, that's an easy fix. All you got to do is back in your timeline is just select those keyframes, because we moved the beginning keyframes forward closer. We would then go back and just select those range of other keyframes that were the animation of those characters, select those, select that area of those layers, and then release your click, then click and drag, and you can move them forward. And then the closer keyframes are together, the faster the animation. So I will do that, and File, Save, and go back into Control Test. And when I click the button, it goes in, and then you notice that it's back to square one. Okay, so I've got this pretty well set up. I'm going to just leave it how I have it at frame 30. Let's say that's where we want that button to start and lead us into this animation. That gives me more room to build out if I want into the scene. And let's say I wanted scene 2 to actually start at frame 301. So I'm going to go back. I'm just going to go ahead and lock the layers that we no longer are working on at this point. I'm going to lock all of scene 1. I can even lock the intro page because we don't need it. I'll select the first layer that's right underneath my title action safe. And when I click new layer, it builds a layer above that, but it doesn't build it above the title action safe. Because if I select title action safe layer and then I click a new layer, now that layer is above the title action safe. That's really not what we want. So I'll select the layer that's right under the title action safe, click new layer, and then it pops one up right underneath the title action safe, so I can still see those dimensions and work with. Make sure that my characters and all my typography is still inside the safe zone. I'm going to name this layer Scene 2. Let's see. And then on Scene 2, if you can recall, what we're going to do is what we did before. Now, when I create the layer and I haven't built anything on it, it looks totally different. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to select the frame outside the very last part of Scene 1 animation, which ended at, in my case, at 300. I'm going to select that first keyframe. I'm going to right click, insert, I'm going to select that first frame at 301, and then I'm going to right click and insert keyframe. And on 301, I'm now going to use that to build my next scene for my animation content here. So I'm basically, I could just build out a whole nother scene. I could do, let's say I wanted another kind of backdrop. Let's say I wanted, I don't know here, let's say brown. I'm not going to even have a stroke this time. And then I'll just create like a whole nother background, use my transform tool, extend it out, side frame a little bit. Perfect. After we've done that, I can now just left click and drag the frame in front of the keyframe, how many frames I need. Across my stage, let's go to 400 in this case. Select them, right click, insert frame. And now it allows us to have the frame range we need, in my case up to 400, to build all my scenic elements on. So 301 is the last frame of my animation, so I'm going to just go to fix that, select this range, click and drag, move them back one, and then anything past that I can just select it, right click, remove frames, and then I can bring this one, which is at 301, to actually 300 if I want to, let's say, bring this one back. That one can start at 300. Anything I don't need, just select it and remove frames. I don't even need all these. And using that process allows me to fix when keyframes and end and start, so that represent my scene. So now I'm actually starting at 300. That looks pretty good. Okay, so this is my build out. Let's say on this scene 2 I got another ground plane, so I'll just grab a whole nother dark shade ground plane. Let's build that across the bottom. I don't really like that color. Let's see. Oh, it's good. Okay. And then I would repeat the same process. I could build new characters here, or maybe maybe I could bring the same character in if I wanted to have another character. Let's say scene 2, animation 2. And then on this frame, I could right click, insert keyframe, and on that keyframe, I could build a whole nother character if I wanted to. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's say on scene 2. And it looks like, yep, I built that on scene 2 animation layer. Looks good. It stretches out the full length. And then I can take all those elements. Let's say I can lock my background layer. And then I can grab all these elements using the selection tool, hold shift, select everything I want, go to modify, convert the symbol. Let's say this is scene 2, person 1. I don't know. You can name it however you want. Maybe get a movie clip. Okay. And then he's in the library, and he can be brought over anytime. So I don't have him here. I have that layer selected. I can bring that movie clip over, and we're all back to how it is. So you want to animate him on this one. Have him outside. And at frame 300, select that keyframe, he's there. And let's say at like frame 345, this character walks in. So I'll select frame 345, right click, insert keyframe. Let's say he's like right here, hold shift, move him in. I will do a classic tween, so I'll just click and drag and select all my range of frames, right click, create classic tween, and now he's animated. Alright, and then on this scene, let's say, I don't know, we'll call this inside the tunnel. So I'll create another layer, call this type, scene 2 type. Inside the tunnel. Perfect. This, again, going back to what we learned before, this can be animated if I choose. And then we would need the button that comes in that represents the next page. So I can go back to my very first part of my animation down here. I got a very big timeline going on. It's going to turn into that. So if I move my plate back and we're on frame 1, I can select that button here. If I unlock my layer, let's just select the button itself and go Edit, Copy, and then move my playhead forward. And I want that button to align exactly where the other one is. So I'll move it to, let's see, Scene 2, unlock that layer. Let's lock the others to get them out of the way and select that layer. That's the background with the button. I'll go to Edit, Paste in Place. That's now, therefore we know exactly where it needs to be. Looks like my title action safe is not ending where we want it, so I can see, make sure everything's still in the line. So I'll grab the very last keyframe for title action safe. You can unlock if you need to, and then click and just move it forward, click and drag it, extends that out. Now we can see where everything is. It looks like my character is going over the button, which is what we don't want either. So let's say on this keyframe, easy fix, use the transform tool. And I can just, let's lock this. Make him in right there. That way he stops where he needs to be. Perfect. On that keyframe. And then for the button. So on the button, let's say it's lock that character back, and then on this layer, we can lock it. We can select the button. Just select the button itself. Go to Properties, hit the swap icon, and we can bring in, it doesn't need to say start, it needs to say, if you remember, go to next page that we created. Click OK. It now says go to next page. Noticing that this ending box, and this might happen occasionally, we go back and swap back to start. See how the bounding box for the symbol ends right on how I had it kind of placed on the title action safe. So I can replace it. Notice that this one's a little bit off. I can just use the arrow keys and move it over if I want. So make sure it aligns. If you also, instead of using the action safe properties, if you want to use guides, remember just what we learned just prior is view. Make sure your rulers are turned on, and you can bring guides out so you make sure your box aligns your button. And that way, back on frame 1, yep. So you can use guides to your advantage as well and know that that's exactly where the button needs to match up. And that's the bonus of using guides. Okay, especially for buttons here. All right, now instead of the start button being in scene 2, it looks like I also forgot to add the button in for the scene 1. So I need to actually go back and do that. So what I'll do is on scene 1, I need to actually create a button for that. So I will, in scene 1, let's see, I will just basically just do the same process. Let's select this button, hit a copy. And then in scene 1, I'll go edit, paste in place. Perfect. This button is going to be behind your character elements. Keep that in mind. So you might have to animate content where the button's a little bit out of the way. If that happens, you can just create another layer. And I'm going to move this layer up. Let's say this is scene 1 button. And I can select that first keyframe, which is at actual animation starts at 30, right click, insert keyframe, then edit, paste in place there, and now it's actually in front. So we can build on a whole nother layer if we need to. And then that created it where it goes past into frame 300. So I would just select that range of frames that we don't need for that layer. Right click, remove frames. And that way the scene 1 button can be on its own layer if it needs to be and in front of your characters. And let's see. On this layer, I can now just take it, first keyframe, select that button, swap, say I need, so you go to the next page, it's done, fix it based off the guides, move forward, perfect, so we wouldn't even need any keyframe for the button because we want it to extend off, it just ends right there. Scene 1 has a stop, right? Yep, so it's going to stop there anyway, so the button won't even need to progress further, it's going to stop there. So, okay. Okay, so I got all my animated content set up through the first 2 scenes. We've actually learned how to create guides and set up the buttons so they match up in the same area, and how to use that little swap tool so you can bring in whatever button you want. I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of the action script at this point in time. We did run a stop command at the very last keyframe for scene 1. That way when it reaches this point it stops until we click on the button and we'll go into scene 2. What I'm going to do here is at scene 1, button 1, I have this button on its own separate layer. You can do either or you can have the button on the background content layer, whatever you choose, okay? But what we're going to do is I'm actually going to go to the first scene here where this button is actually on its own layer by itself. I'm going to grab this button, I'm going to select it and go modify, break it apart, and then I'm actually going to have it reselect and go modify, convert to symbol, because we got to create it into what's called now scene 1 button, and I will have it be called a button. Click OK, and now in the library you're noticing it's called scene 1 button. So this button now we're just using it to bring it over whenever we need it, but we have to actually break it apart and convert it into another symbol for the action script to work correctly. So scene 1 button is right here. This has now been created. I've reconverted to a new symbol. Okay, so then at this point in time at frame 30, I'll have it selected. I'll double click it, go in, I'll have to reset up its animation properties again. So let's insert the keyframe. And then on up, on over, we have the text turn into that color. So you have to go in and kind of do this. That's why a lot of students are just kind of like, you know, I'll just have my button do the same thing every time. Won't do it, you know, won't make it too complex. All right, that one's set up. It's done. And then let's go to last one. And this one is on the actual background layer itself. Again, I could do it that way, or if I want to put it on its own separate layer, I could. I'll just go ahead and keep on the background layer by itself. I'm going to select it, modify, break it apart, and then let's see, select all the elements. Make sure you're not selecting these background elements and only the elements that represent the... Okay, and then what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a new layer. And call this scene 2 button. And I'll bring the button over. Let's see, let's make it easy. Let's just go ahead and copy this one. Play it forward, and then scene 2 button, I'll select that, keyframe. And on that keyframe, I'll edit, paste in place. And then I'll just take that button and I'll go modify, break apart. And then let's just lock our other layers that we don't need to be selecting, and click, drag, select this. Looks like we got another layer. I'll just lock the tile action safe layer here. Click, drag, and select it. What I need, modify, symbol, button, call this scene 2 button. And then I will basically have it selected. Go to script. Again, we don't want to select the stop. We only want this part since this is further in the animation. And then on its keyframe, scene 2 button, window, actions, paste it in. And I will go ahead and just leave that set up. And then let's go ahead and on the background layer, just scene 2, we'll keyframe right here. Select the very last keyframe, right click, insert keyframe. And then on that layer, I will just go to actions and just copy the stop command, either one. And flash, I will right click and paste that in there. Wait, it stops when it gets there. And then on this, let's see, keyframe for button 1, we got to do the same thing. I'm going to copy this script. Again, do not copy the stop, only this script here. Copy in Flash, grab that keyframe, window actions, right click, paste. All right, we have a stop command there at frame 399, so the scene understands it in there. We can build the next scene ahead of it. And then the script setup button is on this own separate layer from all the animated elements. Perfect. I can't remember, did I? Nope, we got to build the timeline for this button. So let me do that. Go in and insert all the keyframes as needed. Over, if you remember, we have blue text. Down, let's see. Text. Range, lock it so I can select the other elements. Both green. And then the hit, we'll just create a hit area. Now you can use those guides to your advantage. Go back to scene 1. Okay, so I have everything set up. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to edit the code, the script, so everything plays correctly. So in my timeline, what we're going to do is, if you remember, we have a layer for the scene 1 button, and that's right here. We've already broken apart and everything and established new buttons. And on that keyframe where the action script is, I'm going to go to Window Actions, and you notice that it says button 1. Well, this actually has to be button 2. So I'm going to, in the action, I'm going to change everything that says button 1 to button 2. So this has to be button 2. This has to be button 2, and this one has to be button 2. And I'm going to go and close it out. Make sure that this button, its instance name is button 2, and it is, okay? Now another thing is, if you remember, this has got to start at frame, well, as it applies to what I'm doing here at 300. I allowed myself some more extended time, but it's actually got to start at frame 300. So I'm going to go back and make sure that in the action for button 1, that it started at 300 in the action script. All right, for scene button 1, it will start at 300. This is button 2. All right, instance name's button 2, and the action should also be, yep, button 2. Everything's button 2. There's 3 slots you have to change to that number. Keep that in mind, okay? Otherwise, it will not work right. I've had students overlook this one especially. They've only changed these 2, and they failed to look over here. But you have 3 places you have to change it to button 2 that corresponds to button 2 that's on your stage, which is right here. All right, I'm going up to the next one. This is the layer that has the scene button 2 that we created, and this one is actually button 3. So in my action script, actions, call it button 3. And I haven't established which frame I want it to start at yet. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and build one more scene just in this video. Again, you want to build as many scenes as it applies to your storyboard or your written script, whatever it is that you're working on here. So I'm going to build one more scene, just to have like a closing scene real quick for this project example. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll name this scene 3. And let's go ahead and just select that first keyframe, right click, insert keyframe, and then I'll just go ahead and build a random rectangle. And I'm not going to do anything too complex on this. I'll go to like frame, let's say for this one, I'll go to frame 450. So just click and drag to 450. Select the frames, right click, insert frame. And I'll just go ahead and create a keyframe here. And then on frame 400, I'll just go ahead, bring my button template over. Okay, where it needs to be. Select it, modify, break it apart, and then we'll immediately go modify, convert it back to symbol. Let's just call this exit button. That makes sense. Center, it's a button. Remember, we got to go back into it, build all the keyframes back in. If you recall, over is we got to change all its properties. So down, select the text, right click, range, lock it so I can grab those background elements, which are the buttons themselves, change the color, and then I will right click, range, unlock all, and then that way I can get in there and change the text. That lock feature really helps, and then the hit is just the area of hit. It doesn't matter what color the hit section is, as long as it's, that looks good. Okay, that's all set up. And let's just have it be the closing scene. We'll say this is just kind of like my closing page. I'll go in there. Let's go to up, and I'll just change this to play again. Go into the button. We'll rename all the keyframes to say play again, over. And down. There we go. And this will be my ending scene. I'm going to go just save everything I got. Alright, and then this button, let's go ahead and just copy this code again. Keyframe. Window actions, I'm going to right click, paste it in. This one will be button 4. So I'm going to change all these to button 4. And then we're going to start at the beginning. So I'll say frame 1. And then this has to be called, select the button itself, and its name it has to be capital B, TTON 4. And then you notice that it's not on the last frame because I keyframed at the end. So I'll just go ahead and select the frame before, right click, insert keyframe, click and drag and overwrite the end. Whoops. Dropping on that. It's there. Got button 4. That's button 4. And it will start at frame 1. And then I can create one more layer. Let's just call that the end. Select frame 400. So at frame 400, right click, insert keyframe, create typography. Let's just say the end. Again, this is a project example. You're probably going to have more scenes than what I'm creating here. And yours is going to look a lot more creative than what I've done. This is just an example project so you understand how to use the code, okay? You want to be building things that look like that student example I showed you at the beginning of this video. So, all right, so everything's set up accordingly. And then we want this to stop at the end. Otherwise, it will just keep playing and go back to frame 1 unless we have the stop command. So the very last one, you want to run that stop. You can copy it from here or this one, either one, doesn't matter. And then I will grab that keyframe, Windows, Actions, right click, paste in the stop. And it will not exit the screen because I have a stop command at the end until, if you recall what I said with the actions, until it clicks and it will start again where it needs to, which is the beginning. So file save. I'm going to go to beginning. Let's make sure I'm moving my playhead forward here. I got a stop command there. Actions for that button. And again, it doesn't matter. You can build the button on your background layer if you want, but if you need to have your button in front of some of your elements and you're seeing like I've done here, you can put it on its own separate layer. Whatever you want to do, it's entirely up to you. So it's not going to break the code, the action script. All right, so I'll save, which I already have. I'm going to go to Control Test, and we'll just test this out. So I click Start, goes to the next page, my animation plays. This button was on its own layer, remember? Hover over, if I left click, it should go to the next scene. Yep, sure does. Looks like it didn't really build the background out to match the dimensions. And I click on this button. Oh, and we, that's why you gotta test. Let's see what frame this is going to. By accident, we need it to go to frame 400, right? As applies to my animation. Yours might be longer, but in my case, I need to go to 400. So I'll grab that action script window. Oh yeah, it's going to 100. That's entirely wrong. So let's switch that to 400. Oh, that looks good. File, save, and we will Control Test one more time. Plays the animation. Yep, inside the tunnel. That's the one I did. Yep, there it is. And then if I click play again, back to frame 1 where it all starts, so you can watch it all over again. Looks like you need to build out the rest of the background elements to fit the dimensions. So let me do that real quick. I can just grab the first keyframe. And I can just zoom out here if I need to and grab the transform tool. Let me just lock all the layers, and I'll just widen this out. Just stretch them out if you need to. It's not really accommodating. Last minute check. Whoops. Ah, there we go. Perfect. Now there we go. Make sure your background elements go past your frame. Oh, last keyframe. I forgot to edit that. Let's see. Oh yeah, the last keyframe. So I can grab it. One last time. Looks good. And we are, well, let's go a little bit more. It looks like I forgot to do it. Oh, I did it for the last keyframe. I forgot to do it for this keyframe. So let me fix it this frame. Stretch it out a little bit more. Might have to make sure they're pretty big so you don't get any place where you have you're outside. It doesn't look like it went outside stage. So make sure you check. That's why you got to do a lot of testing. Ah, there we go. Now it's outside stage. Looks like it goes. Oh, one more at the end. Oh. I'm just grabbing the oh, that's this one here. There we go. Make sure it goes way outside the stage. That's why you do this last minute check. Looks good, looks good. All looks good. Perfect. And then voila. Now, I had this one where it slid up some, so I'll just do this. Edit, copy. There. And everything works great. And when I click the last button, it goes back to the beginning. So yeah, watch your edges on your output. Make sure you have your elements go outside frame and your whole stage is accommodated. That's why you got to do a lot of control testing. Make sure your buttons all work, all your rollovers are working, your hit downs. But that is the process. That's how you do it. Get to the final page, and you can start it over. Perfect.